Hello, very warm welcome to our panel webinar today, organized and produced by the Centre National de la Musique. I am Françoise Claire, I'm head of the classical music sector for the Centre National de la Musique, and I'm very grateful and happy to welcome you here today to discuss a very crucial topic of so-called impeded audiences, and that we are going to discuss with another prestigious panel of speakers, guests, and this is all going to be moderated by Eric Denu, as usual. So thank you very much for following our webinars, and over to you, Eric.
Thanks so much, Françoise. I strongly hope you did enjoy our last webinar dedicated to youth and the inauguration of opening of the Philharmonic des Enfants in Paris and many other events. This time we do go on with kind of audience-related topics, but this time we named our panel in a strange or funny way. Silver is God. It's about what we call in French public empêchés, which are all kind of multi-generational audiences. A very hot topic, all the harder that the COVID times. I've put it pretty much in the spotlight. And for this, we could convince, and we are very grateful to them, we convinced a wonderful panel of people across the oceans, which I will present you. Let's start with the absent one. We'll be joined by Carole Dauphin-Rode, heading the viola parts of Les Siècles, the very prestigious, internationally acknowledged now orchestra in France, conducted by François-Xavier Roth. Carole is up to coming to the studio, and she will be with us in a couple of minutes. I go on with Indre Viscontas, who joins us from San Francisco on the west coast of the United States. Warm welcome to you, Indre. Thank you so much for being with us. Fiona, yeah, thank you. Fiona Harvey from the British Islands, consultant at the Association of British Orchestras. Thanks so much for being with us, Fiona. Valerie Valliere, we know very much in France, general manager of one of our most prestigious state-labeled opera and orchestra in the south of France. Welcome to you, Valérie. Nicolas Buchet, who is heading the Centre de Musique Baroque de Versailles in the Parisian suburbs. Also a warm welcome to you, Nicolas. Thanks so much for being with us.
Hello.
So please let me start with a very personal note. I discovered the topic through very different angles as I was working in very different positions. But I must say, I was definitely convinced about the very strong actuality of the topic as I was reading Indre's book. I discovered Indre's book, which is called How Music Can Make You Better, which I fear is still untranslated into French. I discovered it in Covent Garden, to say the truth. And I was just trying to find the latest recordings by Jonas Kaufmann. And then I came up and there was a common merchandising box with that book, which shows how much that topic is very important in the English-speaking world. It hasn't maybe crossed exactly the channel or the oceans, but the German-speaking world got exactly at the same time a book by Stefan Kölsch called Good Vibrations, who made it into the Spiegel hit list, which means the 10 most sold books in the country. And it remained there many weeks. So at least 2 big countries had these publications. So Indre, I did not introduce you. You were a trained singer. You were an opera manager too. like Valerie from an independent company in the West Coast, and you are a trained, educated neuroscientist, teacher at San Francisco University. Your alma mater is in Los Angeles. You may have lived so many different lives already. Please tell us, as you were receiving our email, Françoise and I, asking you for participating, what were your first reaction? Have you been surprised that Western Europeans, profits, the industry do care for these matters, or you already knew it is something which French, German, British market people do take care of? How did you react?
Well, I have to say that even though I'm from San Francisco, I left my heart in Paris. So if anyone from Paris invites me to do anything, I will immediately say yes, especially if there's some chance that I can get to Paris at some point. So, I mean, that was part of it. But also, you know, one of the things I really respect about France and about a lot of the Western European countries is this understanding by the public that the arts are something that is a fundamental human right and that should be part of, you know, everyone's experience. And there should be programs that are available to anyone, regardless of their circumstances. So I get very excited about, you know, working more with people in Europe to sort of demonstrate, you know, give them even more ammunition, so to speak, for, you know, for this idea that that music actually can go beyond entertainment, that it can heal, that it can help brain development, that it can help connect people, that there's so many ways in which we can use music that go beyond the public perception. And you know, I think because I live in the US and I live in a place where the music industry is, you know, there's a big push on sort of what's going to sell because there isn't a government support so much for the arts. I mean, there are a few little organizations, but compared to what's happening in Europe, I feel like most musicians here think about how they can make a living out of their art much more directly than I think in Europe. I have a lot of friends actually from my voice performance master's degree who are now working in Europe, in Germany in particular, on fest contracts because there's so many more opportunities for young singers in Germany to earn a living than there are in the US. So, and at the same time, I feel like there is also, you know, this notion in Europe that that music has to also have a kind of, I don't know, it seems to me that there are ways in which the music industry too has its own establishments from a long history and so forth. And there's always been an avant-garde. There's always been, you know, really interesting new ways and directions that it's going. And as you mentioned, you know, Stefan Kolsch and, you know, people in Denmark, you know, really have been pushing this notion too of what neuroscience can tell us about music in ways that isn't quite as possible in the US. But I'm very excited to sort of try to bridge these two worlds, try to sort of, you know, one of the things that I've learned to do well by being part of the US system is to create entertaining and informative presentations about music and the brain. So it's not enough just to sort of lecture at people. To me, I also want them to have a good time and come away changed in some way. And so I feel like I can bring those skills, you know, to Europe and sort of just, you know, insert maybe a little bit more playfulness into this topic, but also underscore its importance at the same time.
Well, wonderful. Thanks so much. We certainly come back to the learnings from your book, but maybe let's go on with a very short introductive panorama. We moved to south of France to Valerie Valliere. Also a trained singer, has been an art, leading an agency. She could have represented you maybe some years ago. And then she became an artistic administrative director in Nancy, one also of our most famous and prestigious places in the favorite piazza in France. beautiful Place Stanislas, and then she moved as general manager a few years ago in Montpellier with a very, very high success rate. She will tell us about the audience members, etc. But that's absolutely awesome. Valerie, establishment, entertainment, this is pretty much why the French state and the local governments are giving you some money, even if in the past years they have recognized that the one things Indra was mentioning, like art is not only about status and fun, but it's also a human right, has been, of course, put in the foreground. So how did you react to my email? I sent a personal email. We know each other for some decades already. Oh God, despite I was still very young. And how did you react? What was your first feedback?
Well, but my first was it was like, what is silver? For me, the silver audience is the old people, and we don't need any more old people in our hall. I mean, it's full of old people. So what we're trying to develop, of course, is a younger audience, but it's a wider audience with more diversity, which is the main problem in France. Not that much in England, I guess, and in America, but we still have a very wide audience, even if you have young people. So this is what we have to develop. And we have a very much intellectual approach, not scientific approach. We don't do too much with, we don't work too much with neuroscientist, or it's more like intellectual and social approach. And yes, they give us, we have subsidies, a lot of subsidies. We are very lucky, but it's most of the time it's to develop, of course, an artistic project, So as a director, it's your role, to develop this audience far from our world, the Fribourg, the Fribourg, how do you call that? The human rights and all the Fribourg, how do we call it?
Declaration.
Declaration of Fribourg. It's quite new, and the cultural rights are quite new, but they are there in and in much of the cities, because we are connected more to cities. We have money, of course, and the labels are given from the state, but the money is given from the city. So it's like it's a bit complicated, This is complicated, and the main subject for the mayors, for the president of regions, is to work, in the suburb. It's a social aspect, not too much, unfortunately, the health aspect either. And this is, of course, so we have a lot of people who are totally excluded from music, from the art forms. So this, Fiona, I'm very interested in what you're going to say, but so we work a bit with the disabled people, but not that much, I must say, for the moment in France. And our budget are not connected to this kind of actions, to this kind of investment, So even the equipment, even how we can welcome the people in our theater, For example, I have two halls. One is not accessible for people in wheelchairs. We are in 2021 with 500,000 of people in the city, So that's, things we're going to talk later, I guess, but that's a sign, that's significant, it's, so that's, yeah. So, yeah.
Well, that's very clear. Thank you. Allow me a parenthesis for the not accustomed people to French policies and public policies. A lot of majority of our audiences comes from different countries in France. So we are very happy about that, very proud. Thanks to Centre National de Musique and Françoise for this. So as we explained, we got in 2005 the Convention for Cultural Rights of UNESCO, having been signed now by 100 90 plus countries, etc. And then the Fribourg Declaration came in 2006 or 7 under your control, more or less. But we needed more than 6 or 7 years to put it into French law. It came through a very, very not cultural law called Loi Notre. And then it came definitely in the culture environment in 2016. Thanks to Fleur Pellerin's law called El Cap. So now it's there. And so we have a kind of waterfall regulation in France, which may have inspired other countries, if I'm well informed, in which we put so-called labels. So that was the word we use as French. It had nothing to do with recording industry. So it's not about CDs. A label is kind of brand, it's kind of norm. And Valerie is heading such a label. Unfortunately for Nicolas Boucher, the Baroque word does not have such labels because he's got a monopoly, so he's alone. So, but Valerie shares his label with 4 other prestigious houses, not to mention, of course, both so-called public institution in France, Opéra Comique and the National Opera in Paris. And these labels have very strong directives and rules, including now that very much work Valerie was mentioning about disability, people in hospitals, social care, etc. And we come up later to that. May I switch to Fiona? So Fiona, you were consulting for an institution we like very much at Centre National de Musique, as much as we like our French AFO. It's the ABO, managed by Mark Pemberton. So Fiona, you have been dedicated to that work, which is vibrant one in the UK, which is a little bit in the middle between the United States, Indre was describing, and the French or German or Dutch realities. Please introduce us to the chronology. When did the ABO start thinking about that? How was the status? And maybe introduce us to the work you will be explaining later on, the survey you've been collating.
Thank you very much. Well, I think in this country, probably about 30 years ago, our orchestras, partly because of funding, a lot of our musicians, like those in the United States of America, need to make a living. Our funding is not as good as the mainland European neighbours. Our government funding has gone down over the years, so they also need to make a living. And I think a combination of that and the fact that our orchestras are paid by taxpayers' money made our members realise that they have a responsibility to all people living in the UK, not just those people who come into the concert halls. And that if you define your audiences very broadly, it could be those who are in school, in a prison or in hospital, as well as those who can come to a concert hall, and now those who are watching digitally as a result of COVID-19. And so the ABO itself managed a national education programme back in 1993, commissioning Sir Peter Maxwell Davies, composer, to write a piece on the environment. It was to help primary school teachers teach music that had come into our national curriculum for the first time. And they were being asked to teach children to compose music. And they didn't know how to do that. They were very generalist teachers. So we had 16 orchestras took part that year. It was a chance for some orchestras to dip their toes into the water, have some training at the same time, and to come together as a community to share experiences. And since then, the ABO has supported its members in developing this work. A lot of our members work in schools, in primary and secondary schools, and all the way up to higher education. And more recently, jumping forward, as you said, we realized anecdotally that orchestras are working in a variety of hospital settings or in hospices or in social care. And we wanted to, because we're an association that does a lot of lobbying and campaigning, to be able to tell government the entirety of this work. So we did a survey last year, and the resulting report is orchestras in healthcare. And I can talk about that later, but that's where we've got to at the moment. But the other thing that I just wanted to go back to is that diversity is a very hot topic in the UK, particularly in terms of the workforce. So the administration teams in orchestras and opera companies, and who you see on stage. And the phrase, you cannot be what you cannot see. So if you're not representing your community, then that's what we are needing to do much more of. And then we have many examples of our orchestras who are starting to work much more around disability. And there are some orchestras that are purely dedicated to working with disabled musicians, talented, professional disabled musicians.
Amazing. So we love that wording. We come back to this. You cannot be what you cannot see. What we keep it in our minds. Thanks so much, Fiona. So we come back to you later, as I told in an off wording. You will be with Inder, of course, the science manners. Nicolas Buchet is managing, providing the Centre Musique Baroque de Versailles. I said before that he's an artist too. He is a famous organist, having several recordings in real labels already on the market. He has been co-heading the other national conservatoire in France, the one of Lyon, city in the Alps, before he took over the Cité de la Voix in Vézelay, which is an amazing place, and he made out of it an even more amazing place. And now he wanted to join. I said about Versailles that it is a Parisian suburb, as we all know intentionally. It's not really the common suburb, as it was the very place of the European French power during 2 centuries. So if there is something of the Sun King still remaining in contemporary France in 2021, it is the Hôtel des Menus Plaisirs, where Nicolas has got his office. So the CMPV, as we say in French, has made miracles with the you cannot be what you cannot see. He has transmitted music, even the mainstream people in France have no idea about, to people in Trappes or in real suburbs, I would say. So Nicolas, please, as you were receiving a text message from me, asking you how warmly we would love, with Françoise and the Centre National de Musique, inviting you to this panel. What were your first thoughts? And I do welcome Carole Dauphin-Rode, who has joined us, and we come back to you, Carole, as soon as possible.
Thank you, Eric. For me, it's really funny because in Versailles, this subject is a very new subject. Not only because of the question of the King Palace and the question of the Nobel and what we call in France the tiers état, but also because the institution I have the pleasure to manage today wasn't founded for that. 30 years ago, it was a place founded for cultural heritage, for edition, for publishing, for creating a festival in the Palace of Versailles. And it's a sort of contrary of touching new audiences. But there is, for me, 2 things really interesting. After 30 years of specializing in promoting the 17th and 18th centuries music, there is also a question of turning around. And you can spend 30 years to speak to specialists and specialists talking to specialists. And you can do that during centuries if you want. But if your mission, if what you have to do for the Ministry of the Culture and for the Région Île-de-France is to promote the music, you have to promote it to several people and to share it with a lot of different people. So my the president manager, Hervé Burkel-de-Tel, have engaged the CMBV in this new direction, in this with what you call the suburbs of Trappes. Trappes is a city which is exactly far from Versailles as Paris is far from Versailles. It's 15 kilometers. Versailles is at 15 kilometers from Paris and from Trappes. So it was really interesting to work with a city which is as far from Paris, from the hypercentre of Paris, the downtown, the very rich downtown of Paris, and to work with a very with a city with a lot of radicalism, with a kind of violence like Trappes. And so it was really a question of being to talk to a wider audience and to share the riches, what we have in this institution to a very wide public, to talk to new audiences, and not to turning around in a very small village, French village or Versailles village.
Wonderful, thank you. So we come back later also, Nicolas, to your future plans for this. So Carole Dauphin, I just did introduce you very, very shortly, Carole. Thanks so much for having joined us. You have had to overpass the difficult transportation systems in contemporary France. So as I already introduced you, Carole is leading, is chef de pupitre, as we say in French, of Les Siècles for the viola parts. She has been a teacher at the Regional Conservatory in Paris, the one which is situated in the historic Palace of Rue de Madrid, where so many famous composers, Gabriel Fauré, Olivier Messiaen, and so on and so on and so on, have been teaching too. And she has been co-leading or curating with François-Xavier Roth a new festival in South France, quite close to Montpellier, in Nîmes, one of the most famous and prestigious cities with fantastic Roman heritage. And there she has initiated a couple of workshops, of initiatives, which went that far as they had been proposed and performed in the OFF Festival, in the world famous Avignon Festival, Theatre and Music Festival. So Carole, as I was contacting you and asking you for participating, we had during the first confinement already a first project with Carole, which never came to reality because it's such a struggle always to do innovative digital thing, but we were close to that. And so I was very sensibilized about Carole's motivation and proactivity on this. So what were your first ideas? You sent me immediately a text about everything you had in project. It was really sparkling and wonderful. So why, as an artist, did you develop already so many skills and knowledge and science about these issues? You could have been, limited yourself to working the concertante parts and lines, etc., for your whole life. So what does this topic mean for you as an artist today? You have to unmute.
Later. Good evening, and sorry for the delay. So this is a good question. So I think for me, in my name, this is a political act, because I can't see my place in music without my place in a city. And as a citizen, I consider all the other citizens of the city. So when we arrived in Nîmes, that's the same problem everywhere in France, and I can imagine in other countries. We have this center, as you said, hypercentre, with theater, museum, and also all the activities. And you can just walk 2 kilometers. There is nothing, and even this is very complicated to take a bus to go to the center. Everything is complicated. So all these people in the suburb live can't even think about assist on a concert or assist. Well, yeah. So this is very uncomfortable for me. I can't. Yeah, I can't do just my music for people who knows that effectively this is very nice to go to the concert. So I decided for a long time to go to this kind of people. So I'm very interested in very small children, but this is from the very small. But if we don't speak with the parents, there is no effect. So we decided in Nîmes to go to 3 social centers. So this is in the middle of the city with the building, but not in the city of Nîmes, the suburbs. And this is where the children can also study after school, other play. Sorry, I have in German, I don't know why. So play. And in these centers, we proposed sort of concerts. I say sort. Why? I want to the people very active in the listening. Yeah. So this is a concert for 1 hour, and in this concert, I speak for music. I'm sorry. I spoke German just yesterday, so I speak. This is with a story. So I have a story, and this is small extract of music, not a concert as we can hear normally, and a very important part of participating act for the children or the parents, children and parents. So it's body clapping. We can sing a very small part of what we played just before, and they can ask many questions about the instrument, about the period of the what we played, the composer, etc., etc. And I bring with me some instruments. We can try little percussions, and so. So this is the part with the social centers, and we bring them at the festival in December. Last year it was the end of October. So this is like, yes, we are going now in your house or in your social center, and after that we invite you to go in the center, in the theater, to listen to a concert. So we have 2 pedagogic concerts in this festival, and the children are all invited. And if the parents want to come, for sure they can come at other concerts. So we have invitation for them, and we have all planned for that.
Okay.
And after that, I think, well, this is in part, but the children, this is the most important in the city. They are growing up. I think it's very important. And yes, this is for me, as a musician, is part of my job, is part of my life. I can't just think that it's just to share with always the same. It's not enough.
Thanks. Very, very moving feedback. So some children went from suburbs of Nîmes up to the hypercenter of Nîmes downtown, and did even go that travel, launched that travel up to Avignon. That must have been quite an experience for them.
Yeah.
It must have been wonderful. Some children of Trappes did even cross the ocean and go up to California, close to Indra's home, like Omar Sy. So for our foreign listeners, Omar Sy comes from Trappes, most famous French actor now, probably, Mr. Lupin on Netflix. Indra, maybe let's go back to methodology with kind of method to why did you consider important to write the book I mentioned? Why did you focus your research instead of keep singing all the time on stages in long hours, weeks, years of writing a PhD? So which are the basic learnings you made during that journey on the positive impact of music for very young people, the ones Carol was taking care of, their parents and their grandparents when it is about neutralizing neural diseases and degenerations? What are the key findings of your work?
So for a long time, I actually kept my neuroscience and singing lives very separate, because singing and music was magic to me, and I didn't want to take away the mystery. I didn't want to understand every bit of it. I wanted for it to have a kind of spiritual or, otherworldly quality, because that really sort of was what made life worth living. Ultimately, that was sort of my approach to music. And science paid the bills, and it also scratched my kind of intellectual itch. I was never great at music theory, but I was great at science. So I felt like, I could really sort of stretch myself intellectually through science, and then stretch myself emotionally, artistically through music. So I kept those two areas separate for a long time. And yet I kept, whenever I spent too much time in one domain, I would miss the other one. So for example, I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Toronto in psychology. And then even though I had applied for PhD programs, I stopped all of that, moved to London, and for a year worked as an usher at the Royal Opera House. So 6 nights a week, I was immersed in opera, and it was a completely different life compared to what I had just done. And then I realized while I was living in London, working as an usher, and I couldn't even afford the tube fare to get to work because I made, £6 an hour, that whatever I did in my 20s was going to have to, it was going to require me to do some things I didn't want to do, or that would be like, and so I thought, and I also, sang for some coaches at the ENO, and they all said, you've got more training ahead of you. So I went and did the PhD thinking that would be a way that I could keep training my voice. I could keep developing myself as a singer, but it would pay my bills. And that was a bit naive because there are parts of the PhD that are quite hard. But anyway, I finished the PhD, and then I did fairly well. And instead of going and having a career in neuroscience, I just said, I don't want to do that. What would happen if I took all that same energy and put it into music now? Like how good could I get if I spent all of my waking moments thinking about music? And so that's when I went and did the Masters of Music at the Conservatory in San Francisco. And it was while I was there that I started to realize that there were major problems with the classical music training approach. And the one problem that I felt I could help solve was understanding how the brain learns. There was this big focus, for example, on early talent, on prodigies. You know, I even had a coach tell me in a lesson, well, I know that, you know, I always know when a student has good potential because they pick up what I'm trying to tell them really fast. And that, you know, really triggered something in my mind, because the truth is that if you can pick up something like that really fast, you're just mimicking. This is not a brain change. This is not an artistic choice. You are essentially doing what you were told as a mimic. And so, and I saw this in a lot of, you know, these musicians who were being trained. They basically had this notion that there was one right way to sing, there was one right way to play, that it was correct. And if you made an error, that was a sign that you didn't have as much talent as you thought. And that is completely opposite of how the brain learns. You know, the brain really learns by making mistakes, by making errors, by stretching, by taking risks. And if you're not allowed to go on stage until your performance is totally perfect, it's never going to be that interesting a performance. You're going to do what people have been doing for centuries because you haven't had the chance to develop the skills and, you know, all of the artistic self-expression that is unique to you. So that's where I started to see, wow, like the way that I have learned about the brain can really be useful in this niche where there's this long history and there are a lot of, you know, excellent teachers, but there's also a lot of despair among musicians who are feeling like they are not, you know, it's not what they thought it was going to be. Their life is not, you know, and so that's when I started to bridge the two together. And then over the next sort of decade, I worked very hard to stay away from academia because I knew that was a safe road for me. I knew that if I got an academic position, then all of my artistic pursuits would take a back seat because it's much safer to get, you know, to get an income from university than to go and create a work of art that may or may not, you know, be successful. And during that time, I really kind of just had it was a time for I could sort of learn a lot of different ways in which music is used. And the book that you mentioned at the beginning, How Music Can Make You Better, actually came out of a podcast that was one of the projects I worked on. And instead of asking, what can neuroscience tell us about music, right? How can we understand music better by looking through the lens of neuroscience? I wanted to know what music can tell us about the brain. What can music tell us about what's happening in the mind? You know, this obsession that we have that doesn't make any evolutionary sense, and yet it makes every evolutionary sense if you start delving deeply into it and understanding that music is a, you know, fundamental form of, you know, how we signal emotions and the meaningful things in our lives. And so I started in this podcast exploring this question, and one of the seasons of the podcast was called Music as Medicine. And I started to see that if we look at how music is used to help people feel better or get better or even rewire the brain, we can learn a lot about the brain and not just about, and then we can use that knowledge to make the music even more effective. And so that's been my work recently. And I, you know, I'll just say one more thing, which is that, you know, people tend to say things like when they hear what I do, that I work in the space of music and the brain, they say, oh, you know, music is so great. It, you know, activates your whole brain. And my answer to that is, well, that's true if you're an amateur musician, because you have to work very hard. If you're a professional musician, you're fine tuning what aspects of your brain you're using. And in fact, you know, you can then perform your music and still do all these other things at the same time. Like, so that's sort of one, I sort of use that as a kind of way of demonstrating that this idea that music is one thing and it activates your whole brain is what I call the sledgehammer approach. But music isn't a sledgehammer. It's a Swiss Army knife. It's a precision instrument. And anyone who works in music understands that precision is really important. And so how you use music in your life affects what's happening in your brain, what parts of your brain you're using it. Are you using it to lift your spirits? Are you using it to get yourself moving because you have Parkinson's disease or you want to do, you know, an exercise? Are you using it to learn a language or to learn the alphabet? Are you using it to figure out your feelings and actually process a trauma or an emotion? all of these different uses of music will have a different signature on your brain. And so now I feel really excited. And I went back to academia in part-time-ish. I still have a lot of artistic pursuits because I feel like we finally have the tools now to start understanding these deeper questions. And so it's much more exciting for me now than it was, 20 years ago when I just didn't want to I didn't want to reduce music to, a series of equations or even, neural networks.
So if I understand you rightly, and thank you so much, Andre, for all this detail, you made something like a cognition revolution. I mean, you tried, after having been convinced about the positive impact of neuroscience on music education, you reversed the whole thing and tried to understand how your music competence could help you as a neuroscientist, more or less, and how music could be helpful for neuroscientists and also for doctors, for health carers. Yeah, that's true. And you're telling us, okay, music is not to be considered as such, like a big thing, like a pill, but it's a lot of different pills. So that's a Swiss knife pill in some way. So it has to be very different if Carole is taking care of young people, young children in the suburbs of Nîmes, or if Valerie is taking care of their parents in Montpellier, or Nicolas of even, I don't know, young students in schools in Trappes. So maybe later on you will tell us what are your favorites for each generation. I mean, favorites like Johann Sebastian Bach or Mozart, or just, maybe let's go to case studies. Let's start maybe with Valerie. So your musicians are very active, I know that from very secure sources, at going to acute hospital settings, normal hospital settings, so-called EHPAD,
nursing school, yes,
nursing sessions, etc. So, what is the science behind this? Is that tradition? Is that their own?
No, I think it's like Carole. It's like Carole. I mean, they want to be part of the city. They want to be part of a wider community. I mean, you are lucky to be a professional musician, okay, but you're also a citizen and with personal engagement, and you know that you are being paid by thanks to the subsidies, that are given from the state or from the region or from the government. So, and I am 100% for that. I mean, there is no sense to me. There is no way to do my work only for a part of the audience or of the downtown inhabitants, So I think also as a director, you give a dynamic also, So what we have developed now, it's a big project for deaf people, which was quite unusual in our field, It's starting in Nîmes, actually. Nîmes is maybe 40 minutes from, maybe not even, I think. I just saw one day, I went to see, it's a very good place for dance also, theater and dance. And I saw in the audience some people with sub-pack, the sub-pack has been developed in Canada. It's amazing. It's like backpack that you put in front of, on your chest, and you have the vibrations of the music. So I said, but why do they have that for dance? Why don't we use that for classical music, So we started with the Barbier de Séville. I asked the theater of Nîmes, I borrowed the sub-pack in Nîmes, And we worked with all the deaf associations and all the sign language translator, interpreter, because this is also an issue. We don't have people among our employees who are specialized, who are disabled, which is also a very big issue to communicate, you know, to not being in the cliche, you know, because we have it's like a cliche statement, you know, a bit. So, so we started with Le Barbier de Séville, and we gave access to deaf people to the opera for the first time in Montpellier. And then I don't know, I said, but maybe it's not even enough, because I was really moved by the audience, because some old man came to me and said, you know, Madame Chevalier, this is the first time I'm entering the opera, you know, I never thought that one time in my life I would listen, I would hear an opera and music, and he was totally deaf. And I said, but are you saying that you are listening, you are hearing something? He said, of course, you know, I can feel everything. And being with the others, you know, like to be able to live to have the same emotion than a regular spectator. It's something that I couldn't have imagined in my whole life, you know. So I was like, okay, maybe we can go further that, you know. So I worked with some, you know, I mean, not professional, but deaf people. And I said, what are you missing? And they say, but, you know, why are you always using people who are not real actors, you know, or we are singers? And I said, what do you mean? And they said, do you know that there is a sign language, sign singing thing? We call that chansigne. And I said, I never heard of that, so show me, you know. I said, of course. And there are many actors and almost singers that can sing the music. So I said, okay. So I went to see a show, and I was so touched. I said, then we have to go further. So I think we were the first opera to be able to propose an opera. It was Don Pasquale, Donizetti. So it was quite visual also, you know, with chansigneur, but live and totally in the show. With it wasn't like translator or interpreter on the, you know, on the wings or in front of the audience or in the pit or something like that. It was really, they really rehearsed for the 5 weeks with the team, with the stage directors, with the singers. The first time we didn't hear anything because they were chansignés, you know, but the first time we saw them singing with their sign, you know, it was like we cried. It was such an emotion, you know. And so now we went also further. We decided that we would invest in those sub-packs. So we bought 20 sub-packs. So I said we'd invested because it's quite heavy, you know, also. So it's a real decision. It's a real political choice to say, okay, listen, we're going to spend 200, 300, 400,000 euros on disabled people far from music. So it was that we're not going to do Rigoletto or, Traviata, or let's say that we are doing only 6 productions and not 7. And this amount of money, we put it on immersive, inclusive, more than immersive, but inclusive projects. So that's a political decisions, you know, and I'm lucky that all the employees are really following me in this, you know. It makes sense, you know. Like 2 weeks ago, it's the anniversary of, I don't know, Fiona, you know, Jean de La Fontaine. It's Jean de La Fontaine. It's a very famous, it's the 400th anniversary of Jean de La Fontaine. It's really famous. A
French poet who got very much influenced by Aesop and all these fables.
Yeah, really, really famous. So we did a concert with a chansigneuse, so a deaf singer. And of course a singer and an actress, and we gave access to super young kids. We say, let's try it, even if the SAPAC quite heavy, you know, but we were there to help them to sit. So all the employees were there to help, you know. And, you know, those kids, they were 6 years old, and some of them were really deaf. They said, I can hear, I can listen, you know, and they were crying. When you see that, you know, it makes sense, you know, this is the point, you know, and it was really something that we are going to develop, because it's just crazy. We want to give them more, you know, we want to give them the access of everything, you know. So next time we're going to do Tosca with subpack, of course, with a very simplified subtitles also for everybody, you know. We sometimes sometimes also, you know, we ask our regular audience to give up their favorite seats for this audience. So we call them one by one and say, listen, we need the 10 first rows. I know that you paid a lot of money for your ticket. I know this is your seat. It has been your seat for 35 years or 40 years sometimes. But please, we need those seats. And everybody says, okay, they all say, okay, of course, you know. And they're kind of proud also, you know, to know that, to see this audience reacting a bit differently, you know, sometimes talking during the show, because reacting, you know. And next time that's gonna be the Sacre, the Sacre du Printemps. Because I think it's really emblematic. It's an emblematic opus, you know, and so we are developing. We are like crazy, you know. It's like huge access. Well, this is only for the deaf people, because of course we have many other actions with teen sex workers, everything. But for disabled people and people really far, like totally far, mute, silent audience, as we call it, it's really exciting, you know. It makes your life so much better.
Wow, that was vibrant and inspiring.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Valerie. Fiona, I'm not sure you were expecting having such case studies with intense emotions. So your survey is full of case study coming from the United Kingdom. Please give us a spotlight on the one or two you found the most intriguing and the most striking.
Well, I've been inspired by listening to Indra and also to Valerie. And I think in your last comment, you can't work with everybody, and it's very good that you have made a proper focus on one part of your community, and it's wonderful to hear the impact that you have had on them and your audiences. It sounds a very inspiring piece of work you're doing there. And sometimes it's difficult to convince our politicians and our funders that this work is valuable until they see it. And so you seeing those subpacks and seeing the difference it makes those people is so much easier to convince people why you should do the work. I suppose for me, thinking about what Indra's been saying, and quite a few of our orchestras work with people who have mental health problems and challenges. And there are just two that I want to mention at this point. One of which is the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic, who is a symphony orchestra with salaried musicians, and they have been working for over 12 years with the National Health Service in Merseyside. And there are long-term work that they've done. And I think, again, for me, a lot of this is not a quick win. It's you have give time to it and let the impact come over many years. But they have been working with families and carers and the staff in the National Health Service in Liverpool. So over 11 years, 10,000 service users and their families and carers have participated in the work. And it's about the musicians from the orchestra working with people who have those mental health challenges. And I'm just looking at a quote now: people with poor mental health lose their social networks, and through creative projects, we can help them recreate these and build new ones as part of their recovery. And a lot of the work is about creating music. It's not performing known composers. It's about the participants and the musicians creating music together in the moment. So there are reports that have been written about that work over the years, so I can always send links through to that. And a more recent example I wanted to give was the City of London Sinfonia, and that one is in our Orchestras and Healthcare report. And they have been working with people who are aged 8 to 18 who are patients at psychiatric hospitals. And during the sessions, the musicians play some repertoire as a creative stimulus, but the majority of their time is spent responding to music created by the young people in their sessions. And there are about 250 young people who they've been working with so far, and they are working with academics and psychiatrists and psychologists and neuroscientists to study the work they're doing, so that it has a rigor about it. It's not just it's play, but it's a proper medical research project as well. And so they are exploring research methodologies before they're then going to embark on a long-term research study. So those are just two case studies now, where you've got one already. They've been working for over 12 years in a large region of the northwest of England. And then this smaller project in the city in London with 200 young people has started more recently. And I'm looking forward to seeing how that develops over the years. Can I give you one more?
Oh, yes, please.
Okay.
Please.
So the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra is an orchestra based in London, but they have a residency in Hull, which is in the northeast of England. And when they went to start their residency, they asked the local council authority, what are your priorities? What do you want us to work on in terms of health? And they said, we'd like you to work with people who have had stroke and who are getting over their strokes. And they have formed what they call a strokeostra, so it's stroke orchestra. But they have brought together 10 to 12 patients who are recovering from stroke to work together with musicians on creating their own music. They have occupational therapists, psychologists, other medical people in the room with them who are observing and working with them. It saves a lot of time and money from those specialists having to go out to the people's homes by bringing them all into the one place where they can work together. They all have objectives about mobility for maybe their upper arm or their legs or whatever it is. They all have their own goals. And it's amazing that the transformation that has happened to a lot of those stroke patients. But the one thing that they all remarked on that wasn't a goal was that everybody is sleeping better as a result of doing this work. And it surprised everybody, but it was one of those things that just came out of the conversations they were having. And I'd love to hear Indra's reaction to that, because I just think, I know that health, sleep is something that heals us so well, but to hear that was the result of a big music project, I thought was really interesting.
So Indra, what tells the brain science about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's so heartening, both of those stories, Valerie's and yours. I mean, I've been just taking notes because I need to follow up with you on this.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Me too.
Yeah, I mean, we know very well that, sleep is just so fundamental to brain health. There's sleep deprivation, even an hour less a day can lead to all kinds of problems, including dementia later in life, and higher risk of cancer, et cetera, et cetera. And yet we also know that when we have even a low level chronic stress, that is something that because it acts on the cortisol hormonal system. I mean, low level chronic stress raises cortisol levels, and you need to have a dip in cortisol so that you can fall asleep. And music is has a direct impact on cortisol levels. We see how it can influence stress, and sometimes it requires you know, getting at the core of a trauma to be able to let it go, right? Like we often find ourselves, especially during the pandemic, of just getting through the day. We get through the day, we get through the day, we get through the day, but we're not actually healing that, you know, stressor that is continuing to go, that low level anxiety that we all feel. That is not getting addressed, and that's going to have an impact on sleep. That's why there's all these people who are talking about, you know, all the interruptions in your sleep that have happened during the pandemic. But music not only hits that cortisol system directly, and so has this kind of neurochemical approach, but it also helps us heal those core traumas, because we process those emotions, and it allows us to then feel connected to others. And so I think it's probably in two directions. One is that it gets rid of the kind of baseline cortisol levels just because it's, you know, stress relieving in the moment. But then also I think it has this longer term healing potential, where it helps you work through these difficult emotions and you know, ultimately sleep better. Just, it's such a great story.
So, Nicola, did you also notice that Baroque music can improve sleep capabilities around Versailles?
I'm so pleased to hear you, because I had an insomnia this night from 2 to 4, so I know what to do now. No, it's a subject we didn't work on, the question of the health. We had a big work on social aspects in TRAP, and we're still working on it, even on Jean de La Fontaine. Also, it's a very good subject because it's so connected with the French language and with a French spirit, and with the question of the distance between the subject and the distance with the power also. So no, the question of health is very interesting, and I'm very happy to hear you. But it's not a subject where we're working on. Especially, we are doing some little concerts in the hospital, and we see how the people are better after these little concerts. But it's not a question of science, it's just a question of perception, and also the question of being with people and to taking care of them. But I hear with a lot of interest what Indra is saying on that subject.
May I ask you, this is also a question I will ask Fiona later on, who are your allies in that kind of projects? Because Valerie was pretty much describing a world in which the Opera of Montpellier is acting alone, more or less. Fiona, and I know this is one of the main points you were putting in the survey, that you were asking the healthcare system to definitely also be a partner, much stronger than it is now. But Nicola, these TRAP project points, and this is pretty much in partnership with the so-called national education system, or is that with local governments? How do you connect?
It's a really important point, because I always say to my team, we are not there to empty the sea with a spoon. And when we are working on that kind of subjects, we have really and very quickly the impression to have to empty the tea with a spoon. And that's the reason why I'm deeply convinced that those kind of actions cannot be done alone. And it's always a partnership with people who want to work with you, people who are convinced that you can bring something, and then that you can also bring something from them with you, because it's really important to talk about the question of the exchange in such a relation, and not something that we are going to give with a lot of nobleness to people. It's we learned a lot from the people we are working with, and not we are working for. And that's the question of the partnership. So it could be very, very different and with very different sizes. And it's something I'm also very convinced of, that you can have a very strong partnership with a very little school. And because the teacher of this or the doctor of this unity in that hospital is really convinced that you can do something. But if you don't have this, this partnership, you are knocking at the door and say, okay, we want to do music for you. Oh, okay, yes, if you want, come in. And the results are not so interesting. So the question of the partnership, and it could be so very different partnership, is the question of national education system, of course. It's the question for us. We have worked a lot with the social actors and also with the state, with what we call in France, the préfecture, the representative of the state for a region or for a city. And that is a very long and a very, it's a very long work, because we have to learn, we have to talk the same language. And it's taking a lot of time, because we are coming from such different worlds. So when you are with an actor, a social actor, who is working every day in suburbs and with every day with very hard teens, or with people who don't go to school at 12 years or 13 years, you are coming with your all good volunteers. You know that you want to do the good with a lot of also Christian aspects or social aspects. But you have to go and to be facing the reality, and the people you're working on or with are also present to give you this reality and to face what you have to do now, and not what you were thinking you have to do the good around you. And that's really important. So the state, the social aspect of the state, of course, the administrations of the cities, because if they are not in, they are against you, because they are asking, why are you coming in my city to explain what I'm already doing? Not you're not already doing. Yes, I'm already doing this work. So you have to be very fine, very clever, and you have really to listen what people are explaining to you for this kind of projects.
Thanks.
And
yeah, please go on.
And just to finish, I'm also saying to the team that the people who we have to convince to welcome in our world are also normal people. And it's really important, because I'm always speaking about the little enterprises. And I always we have a project with this kind of building in which you have small enterprises together, enterprises with 2 or 3 people. They say there are not teens, there is not problems of violence when you're going with a plomberie enterprise or people who are doing painting, but they are as far of our music than kids in very hard school or in suburbs. So we can do partnerships with very different people, even when we think that there is no violence. It's middle class people, but they are not closer of our music than other people, and than hill people or young kids in hard contexts.
Thanks. You were anticipating very much some question mark I had to ask Carol. Carole was explaining us the work she has been doing in Nîmes in the latest years, but what she has not said is that Les Siècles, from their inception 2 decades ago, have started to be at the forefront of mediating music to very distant audiences, mobilizing their musicians and the whole orchestra in family concerts, participative workshops, and that from very, can I put it, obscure, in quotation mark, without having any kind of pejorative feeling on that, places in the north of France, in the Département de l'Aisne, or cities like Soissons. It has even incepted a concert hall in a city like Soissons, you see? But also in very flashy places and venues like the Philharmonic de Paris. You know, so my question to Carole, and that articulates very much the Nicolas' discourse, was now you have got this history of events and interventions and initiatives from downtown Paris at Philharmonic de Paris up to these places. Now you've got even a residency in Tourcoing at the Belgian border, which is quite a difficult place, socially and economically speaking, but also this festival in Nîmes. What would you say are the 1 or 2 priorities you see as an artist for the upcoming 20 years, let's say, of artistic citizenship or let's say, a proactive solidarity with the people around, based on knowledge of what is working well, what is working less well, based on the knowledge of the social and institutional and political partners Nicolas was speaking of, which are quite different from Nîmes up to Tourcoing, up to Laon, Soissons, Compiègne, different places. So what would you say are the 1 or 2 objectives as an artist, as a citizen, you put yourself in the contemporary France, which is, as we said, not so distant from LA or San Francisco, or from Montpellier or Hull in North England?
So what is the very...
Yeah, what is your ambition? What would you say is priority and will make a difference in the next decade?
I think the priority is how to how do you say in English? Communier, the communion.
Oh, I think that's a hard work. How to empathize. Be in empathy.
Empathy, yeah, okay. I would like use this word. This is a word. I think it's the most important in this time for all the world, but so in our country, if we can get more empathy, this is a point very, very important for all the population. And the music can take a very, very great place in this subject or purpose, yes. I was just since 2 hours in Tourcoing in a social center, and I was the first time with a new group of children. They were from 6 to 15, and I love to try to get them with me, as they can't imagine. They arrive like they are, also very noisy, very no concentration, no idea from nothing. So I took the sac de printemps with my tablet, and I told them we are just watching 8 minutes. And what is an orchestra? Why are we playing together, etc. And they saw that it was a very great silence, because they could maybe imagine that this is another world. And after that, we did a lot of little tricks, very simple. We played just pass a song, and how do you manage to be with your ear, with your eyes, with all the group, and what is a group, and why it could be so nice to hear a concert. That's because all these musicians are together, and they want to play together, and they want to play and listen also to the silence, and also listen to the others, and also the musicians are very organized. They must be, they have to be organized. So that's all that I want to tell to these children. It's very important. I think that if we can listen to the other, and maybe find some place to hear and to answer, this is a great thing.
Great. But back to hard facts, Indra. How can music help some of the people we have been targeting or speaking of, disabled, younger ones, older ones, fighting with Alzheimer's, struggling with neurodegenerative diseases? Help? What are your favorites? If you had to pick up one style or one form, concerto or vocal, instrumental, etc., what would you say?
Well, I guess, so one of the things that I learned when I was doing a research for this white paper on music in schools, it was sort of, what is the case for music education in schools? Why should we make it a part of schools? I initially thought I was going to talk a lot about, that it boosts brain development, that it helps develop working memory, which is the ability to hold multiple things in mind, that it develops the connections between the two hemispheres, allowing kids to sort of show bimanual coordination, that it helps focus, that it engenders a growth mindset, because they see that, as they work on something, they get better and better and better. And it has this intrinsic motivation. We know music boosts the whole dopamine reward pathway. That's what I thought the paper was going to be about. And the more research I did, the more I learned that the single most important thing that music in schools can do is bring kids to school. So kids who come from parts of the world where it's easy for them to not go to school and instead stay on their corners and get into trouble, essentially, ultimately, right? Where going to school, there's a high absentee rate, there's a low graduation rate. You put a music program into a school and that boosts graduation rates from the 30% to the 100% in some of these interventions. I mean, kids will come to school if they know they have band practice, if they know they have these kinds of music education classes. So to me, from the child's perspective, that seems to have the biggest impact across the board. It gets kids to come to school. And then the teachers actually can do their work, right? If the kids are actually there, they can be effective. If the kids are not there, it doesn't matter how good their curriculum is, doesn't matter how much of the math they've learned to teach, that's not going to get into the kids' brains. So that, I would say, is one thing. But also for kids, for example, who have learning differences or learning challenges like dyslexia. And we now know that dyslexia is actually a hearing auditory processing problem. If you can't hear the difference between ba and pa, how on earth are you expected to be able to read it or write it? And that's what we're learning actually in a lot of these kids. The problem really is in how they process language. And it turns out that music can help develop auditory processing circuitry. So in that way, it's been shown to be quite effective in helping kids with dyslexia overcome some of these neural differences and be able to function in a more traditional school environment. So that's one example. And then we can talk about, Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease and schizophrenia, and there's so many ways specifically that we can sort of look at it. But when it comes to adults, I would say that one of the things that happens as you get older is that you're more and more at risk of being lonely, right? That loneliness is a major problem as you get older, and that it's actually life-threatening. So we know that loneliness correlates with a shorter lifespan. And I think music has this power to make us feel connected, to make us feel, as you mentioned, empathy for others. We know that is involved in our attachment system. I mean, I think that's why we have music ultimately, right? It's because from the beginning, it helps us bond with each other. And so in the cases, whether you're a person with Alzheimer's disease and you can no longer communicate using language because that function is gone, or you're simply an adult whose friends have died, who doesn't have a family nearby, I think music can actually help mitigate a lot of the negative effects of isolation and older age.
Wonderful. Fiona, if we go from the micro of or neuronal macro or personal case and destiny macro up to the macro findings of your survey, what are the three key recommendations you would address to a policymaker at Centre National de la Musique in Paris, or somewhere in North America and the West Coast, or in the south of France, in the local government, to make things getting a little bit better and improving the competence and expertise of our musicians in that area?
I think partnership, is what you were saying earlier, is so important. If you have shared aims in a project, it's going to work so much better than people who, as you say, if you can't translate what you're both trying to get out of a project, then you've got a very difficult starting point. We came across a group of professionals who run arts programs in hospitals, and they have their own membership organization. They've just recently done a survey about whether they work with professional musicians and orchestras, and a lot of them do. So we're about to co-host a meeting for them and our orchestra professionals, and we're going to do a speed dating exercise where they can come together, share experience, and hopefully start some new partnerships in their region. Because I think a lot of it is we don't know who we don't know. And so for my organization, it's about trying to broker some partnerships and some new ways for our orchestras to develop new relationships and work. For our policymakers, what our survey found was that about £1.5 million of money is going into the work in healthcare and social care, which has been raised by our orchestras, but none of that is coming from our National Health Service yet. So our mission is to try and convince our partners in the National Health Service that actually we can save them a lot of money through the work that we are doing, our orchestras are doing, and through our musicians. In all the ways that Indra has been saying, and all of you on the screen have been saying. We have an organization here called Music for Dementia. They have a Music for Dementia radio station that goes 24 hours a day, and they've just started doing classical music playlists as well. So if you're in a care home or you're at home, you can have it on, and it just helps, as you say, the loneliness. There are three orchestras I just wanted to mention as well: Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra in the southwest of England, Manchester Camerata in the northwest, and the Philharmonic in London, all who've done amazing work with people who live with dementia and have won awards for it. And it's extraordinary to see the difference they make. So I would say, and it was difficult during the pandemic because nobody could go and work or visit a care home, but I have seen pictures of orchestras standing outside a care home playing music to the people who are living in their care homes. So it's about more research, it's about funding from our National Health Service, and also building new partnerships and trying to scale up some of this work and making it better known across the people who, the people who work in our industry know about it, but a lot of people don't know about it. And it's how we can get that word out more and more and improve this work.
Wonderful. May I ask Valerie for a ultimate conclusive word? When and where can we enjoy seeing some chansonniers performing?
Well, the chansing is for the opera, so or the but I can send you links. I mean, Le Fable de La Fontaine, it's really fantastic. But I just wanted to tell you that maybe the next step will be to hire a manager, an audience manager. Specialized in disability, but a disabled people, someone, who really knows what he's talking about. And as said Fiona, we are not inclusive at all in our employees, it's a bit of a pity. So maybe this is the next step. I think the major institutions should have someone, specialized in this area. I don't know why it's not developed at all. So it was a pleasure to be with you, really.
Yeah, so usually I get from my personal Houston office with Françoise a final cut, but Françoise does apologize. That's all. I feel a little bit, we feel a bit alone in our spaceship. So I have to thank very much all of you, dear crew members of that fantastic adventure, which brought us from San Francisco up to Nîmes, Versailles, different spaces in Liverpool, Bournemouth. We do great Kirill Karabit and his fabulous work there, and his successors, Philharmonia, of course, St. Thomas Valley, and his predecessors, SAPK, Sandonen, etc. So see you next time. We hope you did enjoy this show. Thank you so much to all of you. And well, next time it will be about London being such a great place for music life. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.